Hello and welcome to today's lesson. My name is Wes. This is Interactive English. And if in case this is your first time watching one of the Interactive English videos, the channel is all about trying to help you improve your English skills in a variety of ways: vocabulary, pronunciation, grammar. Today is a lesson that really is about using reading to build your vocabulary. So it's kind of both about reading and vocabulary and how you can actually do this on your own. And that's a great way to build your vocabulary is with reading. So I do want to, just give a quick hello to some of you who are with me right now in the chat. So many familiar faces. Great to see you. Lolly, hello. Good to see you. Let's see. Naima, Angela, Sleepwalker, Maria Teresa. How are you? Excellent. You're everywhere. Awesome. Maya, Takayo, hello. Nicholas, Eduardo, Esther, Olivia. I will try to keep an eye on the chat as I'm going through this, but there's a lot of windows that I have open right now when I do these lessons and kind of switch back and forth between articles to the vocabulary list. So I'll try to keep my eye on the chat a little bit, but today's topic is a very important topic. It's a very serious topic, and we're going to be discussing mental health. And the first thing that I want to say is kind of obviously, I am an English teacher. I am not a mental health expert. And we're going to be talking, I'm going to be looking at some articles that are related to mental health. Of course, this is something that is very serious. It's something that, again, happens all over the world. And if somebody out there thinks that they may be going through something, some issue with mental health, obviously, I would encourage you to try to call somebody, talk to somebody, a professional about that. So the reason why I'm doing these lessons right now, I'll give you a couple reasons. We're talking about mental health, is first to discuss something that is relevant and that's happening in the world today, typically a current event. This is something that I think many people go through and experience. The second reason is to highlight an organization that we feel is doing great work in trying to help out and really kind of shine a light on that organization. We're going to make a $50 donation. Some of you may see that fundraising button around there if you want to make a donation. I'm going to be talking about the JED Foundation, and I will discuss that a little bit later on. And then the third reason is, like I said, is to help you build your vocabulary, because one great way to do that is to read articles that may be related to the same topic. So I told you that today we're talking about mental health. All of the articles that we're going to look at are related to mental health. And as we go through the article, I'm going to pick out some words that I think are a little more common, that are a little more useful if you are reading about this or you're having a conversation about it. And you should see that the more articles you look at, you tend to come across the same words. And as you continue to do this and you come across those same words, the more likely you are to remember the meaning of that word if you want to use it in the future. And that's what I mean when I say really building your vocabulary and doing so effectively so that you're not just forgetting the information. So let's start out with this. I'm going to start out with our first article. All of these articles, too, are related to mental health during the time of COVID, because with the coronavirus, with the pandemic, there have been lockdowns. All of us have been a lot more, in our homes. It hasn't been normal. And I think because during this time, there have been some more issues with mental health, some more challenges, and that's kind of what these articles are looking at. So let's look at the first one. This is the first article that we're going to look at, is kind of starting with children and then kind of moving into adults. And it says, keep paying attention to your kids' mental health in this pandemic. Because I think, it's definitely been very, very different for children, especially they're trying to go to school and all of these changes have been taking place. Before I pick out some vocabulary words, I want to look at this first part right down here. And this is what I'm reading right here. if you can see it. It says, keep a watchful eye on kids right now, experts say. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, number B, the one, to campaign shares 5 steps every person can take to help prevent suicide in a person of any age. So there are a few words in there that I would like to talk about that I think are very relevant to this conversation. So this is when, let's move over to the vocabulary list that I've already created with this lesson. And you can see right here that this is the title of the first article we're just getting ready to look at. Keep paying attention to your kids' mental health in the pandemic. So there were a few words right there in that short little first part that I read. To keep a watchful eye, to keep an eye on someone, it just means you're paying attention to them. I think it's a very common phrase. In this case, they say keep a watchful eye. If you are watchful, that's an adjective. It means you're really watching somebody, you're focused on this. And that's a good expression. You want to keep a watchful eye and looking for signs maybe that somebody might be struggling with mental health. So this is a good phrase to know. To prevent something is to stop something from happening or from occurring. And again, this is another good verb to use. And then it talks about suicide. Suicide would be the act of killing yourself intentionally. One thing, this is a noun. One thing I do want to say about this word, if we're talking about suicide, people may often use it with the verb commit, to commit suicide. I've heard people try to use it as a verb, like to suicide. I think grammatically you can use it. It's not very common. In this case, again, in the article that I just read, they are talking about trying to prevent suicide. But if this happens, you would use it with the verb commit. So there was quite a few words in just that first part that I was talking about. And again, these are words that we'll see later on as we look at some of these other articles. So let's just look at this first part right here. It says, I'll read it and you guys can just follow along. For nearly a year, most of our children have been navigating the new difficult normal, social isolation, deeply stressed parents, the effects of financial uncertainty, school from home and from Wi-Fi equipped school buses if they don't have internet. While COVID-19 itself has largely been sparing of children's physical health, studies have shown it has taken a toll on their mental health associated with an increase in suicide-related behaviors, experts say. I'll just carry on. I'm not going to read the whole article. Just the first part of it. Suicide was the second leading cause of death among children of adolescents ages 10 to 19 in the United States as of 2018, before the pandemic struck. Though suicide attempts and ideation were consistently higher in 2020, a recent publication, peer-reviewed article in Journal Pediatrics found some increases. Basically, what the article goes on to say is that they found that where the pandemic was hitting, the areas where it hit the most, that children were struggling the most with their mental health. So that's kind of the comparison that it was making. There was another word that I want to talk about. So again, even in this article, they mentioned suicide again, isolation, social isolation. And that was the other word that I put on our vocabulary list. Isolation is just talking about being alone. And I think that when you talk about maybe people dealing with mental health, people might feel like they are isolated. So I just used it in a different context because, different part of speech. Isolation is a noun. And in the article, they talk about social isolation. Social means that you are with other people. But during this time, a lot of us have experienced some social isolation. So these are the first 4 words that I wanted to look at. And again, we're going to keep adding to the list. I will also say that I'm going to, if you want to continue reading some of these articles, down in the description, I'm going to leave a link to the articles as well as a list of all of these vocabulary words so that you have them in case you would like to review. Let's look at the next part. right here. So the next one that I have, sorry, I haven't been able to look at the chat just yet. The next article that I wanted to take a look at was this one right here. It's talking about mental health difficulties on the rise. Let's see, make sure you guys can see this. Okay, so this is kind of talking about this, starts out talking about the experience of this one person. Claire Brennan Tilburg's 11-year-old daughter has been hospitalized twice in recent months after sharing that she was having suicidal thoughts. The Massachusetts girl has autism, depression, and anxiety. Although her daughter has been hospitalized before, Tilburg said things worsened when the pandemic hit. Her school went online and she could no longer meet with counselors in person. Suddenly, the structure and support that help many children keep a sense of normalcy were gone. So there's a few words just in those first two paragraphs that I want to look at. They were talking about the experience of this one woman's daughter that had been hospital twice. Suicidal, this again is the part of speech. It's now used as an adjective. I told you that suicide would be intentionally killing oneself as the noun. Suicidal as an adjective. And here when you talk about just mental health, there's a few words right here: autism, depression, and anxiety. I want to look at, and I've added those to our vocabulary list. So again, some of these words may be familiar for you, and that's great if you already know some of them. If not, it's always good to review as well. So if you're referring to autism, that is a brain condition that affects the development or of social or communication skills. It's something that does affect many children and adults around the world. Depression is talking about the state or feeling of being very unhappy and without hope for the future. So often you might hear people use this as an adjective if somebody says that they feel a little depressed, they're a little sad, they feel a little hopeless. If you're talking about more of maybe somebody who is enduring this constant state, they may use it more as a noun, and they would say somebody maybe suffers from depression or they're going through depression. And anxiety is something that I feel like all of us probably get at one time or another, this feeling of anxiety, which is just nervousness or worry. So let's go back over to the article. I'm going to go through this a little at a time as we read the article, and we'll continue right here. So it says that, again, that when the classes moved online in this one person's experience, the help that they were getting was gone. Oh, there was one more word that I wanted to look at in here. It was talking about counselors. I also added that to the list because it said that the help they were getting, for example, like school counselors, it was no longer there. I did add that to the vocabulary list. Counselors is talking about somebody who is trained to listen and give advice to other people. So typically at schools, there are people who are trained to listen to students if they have problems, worries, concerns. Maybe they might be going through some anxiety or depression, and they would listen to the students and they would give advice, and they would be school counselors. Let's continue with the article. It says, sorry, here we go. So it says they were gone. It says studies have shown that depression increases during teen years. 1 out of every 13 high school students has attempted suicide, and at least half of children with mental illness do not get treatment. When schools closed across the U.S. in mid-March in 2020, it separated students from other students, along with advisors, teachers, and other adults at school. Additionally, for many students, school was the only place to get mental health services. So this was a big challenge. This was an issue that many students or children were having to endure. The other, again, looking at some of these words that here talked about, again, it mentions depression that it increases during the teen years, talking about students that do try to commit suicide, and also that where it says suicide, at least half of the children with mental health illness do not get treatment. This is another word that I wanted to highlight and put on our vocabulary list. Whoops, sorry about that. Was down here. So if we're talking about treatment in general, it would be like the use of drugs, exercise, therapy to improve the condition of an ill or injured person. So treatment's a very broad term that you could use to talk about, well, somebody who's sick, they may go see a doctor and they receive treatment. And in that case, it might be some drugs or medicine. In this case, I think when you're talking about mental health, I think a lot of the articles, especially that we're looking at today, it would refer more to therapy. That they would go see somebody and talk to somebody who is like a counselor. They would listen to them. They would give advice. And that's actually another word that we will talk about in just a moment in the next article. So again, the first two articles were talking about the more students and children. The next article is right here. I have four articles today, so it's quite a bit. This says nearly half of U.S. workers suffer from mental health issues since COVID-19 pandemic hit, report finds. Of course, as you can see from these articles, a lot of it is focused around, they're from the United States, which again, I think people around the world are experiencing this, whether you're talking about school children in the United States or school children in other countries, because the experience during the pandemic, I think for many people has been similar, and same with work. But these articles right here are just talking about, are really referring to things that are happening in the United States. So this article, nearly half of U.S. workers suffer from mental health. I just want to look at a few things and add to our vocabulary list. So it says, again, I'll read it. You can just follow along. If you're stressed out, anxious, or feeling lonely, you are not alone. Nearly half of American workers have been suffering from mental health issues since the COVID-19 pandemic began, at a significant cost to their well-being and potentially to their employers' bottom line. There has been a significant jump in full-time U.S. workers dealing with mental health issues in the last 12 months, according to a report from the Portland, Oregon-based insurance company, The Standard. I want to look at, where is it? Here, I keep going. Sorry, I lost the place here. About 46% of the more than 1,400 workers surveyed at the end of last year reported that they were struggling with mental health issues, compared to 39% a year earlier, and more than half of workers, 55%, said a mental health issue has affected them more since the pandemic began. Yet many may not know where to turn for help. The stigma of mental illness, therapy, and mental health at work can keep many employers from using resources, said Dr. George James, a licensed marriage and family therapist and member of the CNBC Financial Wellness Council. So it has to be driven, encouraged, and supported from the top down. So let's look at a few of the words from this that I added. Again, we talked about anxiety, the noun, your feeling of worriness. Here we come across the word again, but they're using it as an adjective. You feel anxious. One word that I want to talk about was well-being. All right. I've added that to the vocabulary list. It's talking about people there's been a significant cost during the pandemic to everyone's well-being. Another word, they're talking about the stigma of mental illness, and then therapy and therapist. So let's go over to the vocabulary list and have a look at those words, and I'll refer how they were used in the article. So, I forgot. Yeah, to suffer. Suffer is, I think, another common verb when talking about somebody who's struggling with mental illness, or again, it can be used in a variety of contexts. If somebody's perhaps talking about like medicine, medical field. But to suffer is to experience physical or mental pain. Again, the articles that we're looking at would really refer to that mental pain. Well-being, as I pointed out in the article, it was saying that people's well-being was suffering, that the state of happiness, or just our feeling of happiness, our general well-being. And that last one, it talked about stigma. It said that there was, are there any? Yes, the last two. It said the stigma of mental health. So this is a word, stigma is talking about a strong feeling of disapproval that most people in society have about something. So when I think you talk about, like, it could be used in a variety of ways, but something that in society that maybe they don't approve of, and you'd say there's a stigma on this thing. It's not a good thing. So just to give you another example of what stigma might mean, think about a long time ago. In some countries, they may think that marrying a foreigner from another country, they say, oh, like we disapprove of that. Society would disapprove. And you could say there is a stigma on international marriages, that society disapproves of it, and you could say there's a stigma on this thing. And again, I think when it comes to stigmas, I think just in general, as societies become more open-minded, as societies become more tolerant, people in general, these stigmas start to go away. And I think that's a good thing. So it's talking, in the article, it mentioned the stigma on mental health, that if somebody is suffering from mental health, maybe they worry about calling somebody or trying to contact a therapist because they worry about what their friends might think, and that there's a stigma on this. And it talked about I mentioned it before, therapy is treatment that helps someone feel better, and you would typically use this with the verb get. You get therapy. And the person that you would see, if you're talking about the person, is a therapist. Someone whose job it is to treat a particular type of mental or physical illness. One thing I want to point out, in case some of you might be wondering, well, what is there a difference between counselor and a therapist? I would say that, in just my view, like I was trying to look this up, the way it was explained, like counseling is more of a broad topic, and you could say that therapy might fall under it. So counseling, I think, generally deals with more listening and giving advice. Therapy would be more of a specific thing you're working on, and you would help someone. Could be physical or mental. There's physical therapy if you get injured, or if you are suffering from a mental illness, you could go see a therapist that might work with people who suffer from depression, or who deal with anxiety, high levels of anxiety, and you would see a therapist specific for that. Let's continue. I have one more article that I want to look at, and then I want to highlight today's organization that do good work. I have been kind of glancing at the chat. Sorry, I know you guys are kind of talking with each other. That's great. If you have questions, if you want to ask each other, I love it when people are able to help one another with like certain words if you don't know what they mean. So I have one more article that I want to show you, and then we're gonna take one more look at the vocabulary list. So here's the last article, and let me make sure that you guys can see this. Let me change this a little bit. Okay, and then I'm gonna, whoops, sorry about that. I'm gonna try to move over here. Maybe this will help. So it's talking about, I think a lot more people have been going to see mental health professionals. So this article is looking at, well, mental health professionals are the ones taking care of us. Who's taking care of them? And in this article, it says USA Today spoke with half a dozen mental health workers who told us the pandemic has been the most challenging year of their professional lives. They're seeing probably a lot more people. So again, I'll read this. You can follow along, and then we'll add a couple of words to our list. When a world in pandemic shut down, the mental health professionals did not. They kept working, many more than ever, counseling patients on how to survive something they'd never seen before, something they feared themselves. They counseled while the virus ravaged their neighborhoods, with their children in the background, through months of racial unrest and a presidential election that was the most polarizing in many of our lifetime. This has without a doubt been one of the toughest years of my life, let alone my career, said Michael Mendel, a licensed clinical professional counselor who works with adults and adolescents. Adolescents is like younger children. USA Today spoke with a half dozen mental health workers who told us the pandemic has been the most challenging year of their professional lives. Every one of them said they'd experienced symptoms of burnout. Some are in therapy themselves, but most are not. These professionals are helping their patients cope with stress, anxiety, and sometimes unimaginable loss while also managing their own suffering. Many have taken on heavier caseloads with more patients experiencing trauma, suicidal ideation. Most have transitioned to telehealth, which made therapy possible during the pandemic, but reduced the intimacy many therapists count on to connect. Let's go back and look at some the things from this article, some other words. Again, even words that we talked about. I told you that counselors are the people that would listen and give advice. In this case, they're talking about counseling people. You could use this as a verb, to counsel someone, to actually give them advice, to listen and give them advice. So a lot of, I think in this article, in all of these articles, we're coming across the same words, but they may be using it as a different part of speech, like a noun or an adjective. So again, they're using it as a noun. They counseled these people, these health professionals, counseled the people during this time of the pandemic. This is not like it's talking about the election was polarizing. If you don't know what that means, it means it's very divided. It was a very divided election. Right here, again, this gentleman talks about he is a counselor. And the other one I wanted to highlight, I didn't add this to the list, but it's talking about burnout, symptoms of burnout. Burnout is when you basically just, you're overworked and you just get too tired and you can't continue. Symptoms is a word that I wanted to add because I think it's useful when talking about mental health, but also, again, it's something that you might hear being used medically. Your doctor might mention that. So symptoms, if we go over to the vocabulary list, here it is. Oh, wait, I did not add them. Sorry, maybe I can add it in just a moment because I had another question. The symptoms are the things that maybe identify that something is going on, and somebody might have symptoms that tell you something is wrong or a problem exists. The last paragraph had some of the words that I wanted to look at. It said these professionals are helping patients cope with these things. We talked stress, anxiety, we talked about, and unimaginable loss. So patients, it's talking about they're helping their patients cope with these things. So if we go over to our list, patients, again, is a very, it's a common word that you might also hear people use, like doctors. Doctors have patients. Dentists have patients. Therapists have patients. And these are people who are receiving medical care in some way, could be physically, mentally, and they are patients. To cope with something, this is a verb. It means to deal successfully with the situation. So in this case, they're trying to help their patients cope with these issues of stress. They're trying to help them cope with anxiety so that they can deal with it successfully. Another word, if I go back over to the article, again, it's talking about managing their own suffering. I pointed out before that verb to suffer, to you are, where is it? You are experiencing some sort of pain, mental or physical. And trauma is the other word that I wanted to point out in this article. So if we go back over to our vocabulary list right down here at the bottom, trauma is referring to a severe emotional shock that is caused by some upsetting experience. Some experience is very upsetting and it causes shock. In this case, like I said, the upsetting experience is really dealing with the COVID, the pandemic, and everything else that you have to deal with because of that. The isolation, the social isolation that they talked about in one of the previous articles. Some of you asked about the word ideation. One of my favorite sites, just to show you guys, if you want to use an online dictionary, I typically prefer to use Cambridge. I think that the meanings, when you put in the word that you want to look up, I think Cambridge really does a good job of trying to use simple language so that it's a little easier to understand. So they talk about suicide ideation is basically, I think I saw that in the chat before, referring to the activity of forming ideas in the mind. So I think before it was talking about in both of the articles, like suicidal ideation, kind of like that idea of suicide starting to possibly form in some people's minds. That's what it's referring to. So those were the articles. Again, if you want to read more about those articles, I've linked them down in the description. I've also included the vocabulary from this lesson that these are words that I think are useful if you're talking about, well, mental health, or if you're going to continue reading about it, I think you'll definitely come across them. I do want to highlight the organization I mentioned that you might see, depending on where you live, you might see like a fundraiser or a donate button around here somewhere. And the organization that I wanted to highlight today that was doing great work is called the JED Foundation. So this is a foundation. You can kind of see, I'll just read this first part, which will give you the idea. It's protecting emotional health, preventing suicide. Transitioning into adulthood can bring big challenges and intense challenges. The JED Foundation empowers teens and young adults with the skills and support to grow into heavy, thriving adults. So the JED Foundation works with school children. They work with young adults, adolescents. That was a word in one of the articles. I told you it means younger people. So they're working with children if they are going through some, maybe suffering some mental illness. Perhaps they have thoughts of suicide. This is an organization that helps younger people and says protecting their emotional health. I read a little bit more about the organization. It's called the JED Foundation because it was started by a couple their son was named Jed, who committed suicide. And after that, they began this foundation, and it's gotten bigger, and they just do excellent work. So this is the organization that we're going to donate. We're going to make a donation to this organization. If you guys also would like to get involved and make a donation, that is awesome. But this is something that is, I think, very serious. Everybody all over the world, people deal with this. I know the articles talked about it more so in the context of COVID, but it's something even after COVID that is going to persist. So like I said, hopefully that some of these words will help you if you want to learn more about mental health, if you're reading articles about it, or even if you're having a conversation. Again, I am not a mental health professional. I'm an English teacher. This is about building your vocabulary. But again, if you think that you're somebody out there who might be going through or experiencing something related to some of the things we talked about that they mentioned in the article, anxiety, high levels of stress, depression, then I would always encourage people to try to contact somebody, talk to others, and try to reach out. Try to keep a watchful eye on others as well, because this has been, last year was a very difficult year. This year is also a tough year, and I think that we're all trying to get through this. So I again, check out the links down in the description. I've also put a link to the JED Foundation down there if you'd like to learn more about that foundation as well. And again, even if you can't make a donation right now, that's perfectly fine. I'd still encourage you, go check out the website. It's great to learn and read about some of these organizations that are doing good work. I think that especially when you see the news and you see all these problems and troubling things going on, it's great to learn about organizations or hear about organizations that are doing a lot of good in the world today. So check out those links. They are down in the description. And I hope that you guys learned some new words today as well. Thank you guys. I want to give some shout outs. Thank you, Lolly. That's great. I'm glad that you enjoyed the lesson. You had mentioned that you are a health nurse working, mental health nurse. All right, excellent. We need more people like you. Thank you guys. Sleepwalker, Mohammed, Maria Teresa, good to see you. I just saw you a moment ago. Vicky, glad you're here. Glad you were able to tune into the lesson. Madi, Laura, let's see, just some quick shout outs. Yashar, Ashan, Dan, Mary. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I will see you all next time. So long.